Do you have any takers?
I guess since he's my colleague at GW, I need to respond. People have been predicting the downfall of the Communist Party since the beginning of the post-Mao period, maybe before. And yet it still is in power. It doesn't face an obvious organized opposition. It's got a number of challenges in front of it, but has dealt with challenging issues in the past. Despite the frustration with corruption, with the environment, with a variety of things, people tend to be optimistic about the future, expect their incomes to continue rising. Now, that may create rising expectations the party can't meet, but for now at least, they've been doing a pretty good job keeping people, in a material sense, keeping people satisfied. I think the party's been more adaptable than people often give it credit for. It's not always the most nimble of organizations, but like any other huge organization, it's slow to change, but when it does change, it addresses problems well enough to remain in power. And so I don't see any particular change coming about as a consequence of the economic slowdown. I think the party's done a pretty good job getting people ready to expect a slowdown. What's come about has not been terribly surprising. It's been a slow, gradual decline, not a bursting of a bubble. So I think for a variety of reasons, the party is in a reasonable good chance, a good place to survive. Like I said, it has challenges, but has met challenges in the past.
I might just add a couple things, but I would subscribe to what was just said, so I won't repeat all of that. I think we have to be modest what we know about economic and political developments in China, and that just speaking for myself, but I think many of my colleagues feel we've not been this uncertain about the fundamental dynamics and direction of China, certainly since 1989, and I would go back a couple of decades before that. So I think we have to be very modest about what we know and don't know and making predictions, but my instinct is very much what Professor Dickson said. So then you ask, why are we in this mode? Why do you get such varied predictions? And I think it stems from a very simple set of facts. And that fact is that reform since '77 has changed China. It's a much more pluralistic society. It's much bigger bureaucracy, a pluralized society. And also, society itself has been empowered in very important ways. Money, and transferring money, both internally, externally, investing it, sort of, we'll say non-governmental groups, realizing that's a complicated concept in China. Information that Sasha was talking about. So what we have is a much more divided, complex bureaucracy in society, and we have a much more empowered society. And so the question is this new society going to accept a strongman definition of leadership? And we don't know the answer to that question. China's middle class, however you want to define it, is probably 350 million people. I mean, that's bigger than the United States. And we have certain expectations about a middle class, but those haven't been entirely borne out, at least thus far. So I would say, while I don't agree with the broad character of the article you mentioned, you're hearing very different predictions precisely because this is such an uncertain condition that we, at least on the outside, and I think many Chinese I talk to are equally uncertain.
I think both points that were made are very good ones with regard to how to think about it. But I also would just submit that I think that one of the reasons we're seeing more of these kind of coming collapse voices, if you will, is that the group of people who are arguing these points seem to have what, from my perspective, is a bit of a distorted analytic lens through which they're looking at the problem. So in many ways, I think there's a school of thought that had existed for some time, especially under Hu Jintao's leadership, that China was going to move toward greater institutionalization and, a lot of these things. Xi Jinping is an inconvenient truth for, for, that school of thinking in the system. And the other is that there seems to be an undertone of anger in these articles. anger at the party for, in my mind, being itself. They are an authoritarian regime, and they behave like one. So it's not surprising that they haven't gone toward this opening and so on that these analysts seem to think they should have. And I think that skews their analysis.